This is probably the best tasting potato I've ever grown, in my opinion. Really golden inside to it. Probably the most golden tater I've ever seen as far as the flesh goes. And I'll show you what one of these looks like here. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope everybody out there is having a fantastic day. It is Wednesday, January 18th. Here in South Georgia, and we just got our seed potatoes in the mail from Wood Prairie. So in today's video, I want to show you the varieties we decided that we're going to be growing this spring. We're going to revisit some of the things that Jim talked about in our interview that we did about green sprouting potatoes so they can kind of hit the ground running. And then we're going to talk about how we decide where we're going to plant our potatoes. So we've got 7 different varieties of seed potatoes in this box right here. Some that we're going to be planting in the in-ground garden, some that we're going to be planting in our raised beds. And as I've told you before, if you want to give their seed potatoes a try, their website is woodprairie.com, and you can use the code LazyDogFarm to get 5% off your order. Now, for the varieties we're going to be planting in the in-ground garden, I got a 5-pound bag of those because I want to plant a full row, and from my experiences, 5 pounds of seed potatoes cut up is enough for a 30-foot row. For the other varieties, the 5 varieties that we're going to be planting in the raised beds, I just got a pound of each of those just because we're kind of trying them out in the raised bed, planting on a much smaller scale than in our in-ground garden. So let's take a look at these 7 varieties we decided to grow. I'll open up the bags and kind of show you what they look like. So starting off with the ones that we're planting in the in-ground garden, the ones we've got 5 pounds of, we got Huckleberry Gold here. And I know this doesn't matter to a lot of people, but I really like the packaging on these, just like the color, being able to kind of see what the potato looks like there. That may not matter to some folks, but I really appreciate it. Kind of gets me excited about growing potatoes. Anyway, we tried the Huckleberry Gold last year, did pretty well for us. Really good tasting potatoes. And these kind of have a little bit of a dust on the outside of them, so it's hard to tell the real color of them. But when you dig these have a really dark purple color and then have kind of a nice gold inside there. I'm not going to cut open these yet, but I will show you what they look like. And Jim also mentioned on our interview, I can't remember if it was part 1 or part 2, talked about the value of having smaller seed potatoes, how they have a little more vigor and tend to grow better than really big seed potatoes. Now the next one we have for the in-ground garden is Baltic Rose, another one we grew last year. Really like. This is probably the best tasting potato I've ever grown, in my opinion. Really golden inside to it. Probably the most golden tater I've ever seen as far as the flesh goes. And I'll show you what one of these looks like here. So you can see, can't really tell that it has a red outside there, but it does, kind of just has that dusting on it there. Then as far as the varieties we're going to be trying in the raised beds, just doing kind of small plantings of, we've got the Sarpo Mira, which Jim talked a lot about on our interviews. This is a variety that was made popular in Europe, now is available through Wood Prairie for us folks in the States. And I think Jim and them are the only ones that have this particular variety here. So I'm excited about trying this one. I know a lot of people have heard a lot about this variety but haven't been able to get it over here. Now you can. I think they only have this one in 1-pound quantities. So this is something you can just kind of try out this year, and hopefully next year you can order it in larger quantities. And it appears I misspoke. I said there were 2 of these 7 varieties that we were going to grow in the in-ground garden. There's actually 3. So I got 5 pounds of this one here called Prairie Blush. Never tried it before, but I've heard good things about it. So we're going to plant this one in the in-ground garden as well, a whole 30-foot row of this variety right here. And then as far as the other varieties for the raised beds, we've got this one here called Rose Gold. The name of that one just sounded like it would be a really good tasting potato, so had to try a few of those. And then we've got this one here called Elba. And Jim mentioned this in one of the interviews, part 1 or part 2, and talked about how this was a great variety for containers or raised beds. So figured it would work well for us in a smaller planting in our raised beds right out here. And then the last one we got for the raised beds is this fingerling variety here. Now fingerling potatoes traditionally aren't super productive compared to, say, some of these other varieties that we're going to grow, but they're kind of fun to grow and they taste really good roasted. I'll show you what one of these looks like here. If I can get this bag open. So there you go. That's a fingerling potato right there. Now, in our interview with Jim, he talked about the importance of doing a process called green sprouting the potatoes about a month before you're going to plant them. And the time is going to work out perfect for us because we're about a month away from when we usually plant potatoes. So this green sprouting process, also known as chitting, basically involves getting this seed potato here to break dormancy and start forming some sprouts so that when you put it in the ground, it emerges pretty quickly and doesn't just sit there where it could be susceptible to rotting. Now, until I talked to Jim, I had never heard the term green sprouting. He mentioned that chitting was more of a European term, that over here we use the term green sprouting more frequently. It seems like I've heard chitting more than I've heard green sprouting, which is none. But we're going to use the term green sprouting from here on out since that's what Jim called it. So based on Jim's advice, you don't want to plant a dormant potato. And that would be a potato where you can really not even make out where the eyes are on the potato. If you plant a dormant potato, then you got to wait for it to start sprouting while it's in the ground. That could take several weeks, maybe even up to a month. And during that time frame, if you get a lot of rain, your potatoes could rot before they sprout. So Jim said you want to make sure you plant a seed potato or seed potato piece where you can at least see where the eyes are. But if you've got some little sprouts coming out of them, that's even better. So let's walk through this green sprouting process that Jim explained, and I'm going to tell you how we're going to try to do it here. And as I told you earlier, ideally you want to start this about 30 days before you plan on putting your potatoes in the ground. So with this green sprouting process, there's kind of two phases. We've got a warm, dark phase, and we've got a cool, light phase. So in the first phase, the kind of warm, dark phase, we want to keep the seed potatoes in a dark place and where the temperature is somewhere between 70 and 75 degrees. And what this is going to do is make these seed potatoes break their dormancy period and start forming some little sprouts. So Jim mentioned that this first phase takes about 7 to 10 days, but it can vary some with variety. Some varieties have a longer dormancy period than other varieties. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to leave these seed potatoes in this bag. Should be dark enough in there, I think. I've got a bunch of these little plastic containers left over from another project, and I think they're going to be handy keeping all my varieties separate. So I'm going to make sure the bag's kind of wrapped up, make sure no light's getting in there, and I'm going to put these in the closet in my office where it stays about 72 degrees all the time. It stays nice and dark in the closet there, so we'll put them, each variety, in one of these little tubs here, wrap up the top of the bag good, put them in that closet and let them sit there for 7 to 10 days. We'll kind of keep an eye on them and wait until we start to see some sprouts there. Now this second phase, the cooling phase, is where things get a little more tricky if you don't have like a walk-in cooler or somewhere where you can keep it really, really cold on a consistent basis. So with this phase, what you want to do is you want to take the seed potatoes out of the warm area from 70 to 75 degrees and also take them out of the dark. So you want to expose them to light, but you want to have the temperature between 50 and 55 degrees. And according to Jim, what this does is slows down the respiration process, leaves more energy in that seed potato, and gives it a lot more vigor when you do put it in the ground. So how are we going to do this here? Well, I don't have anywhere I can keep these seed potatoes consistently at 50 to 55 degrees in the light. So we're just going to have to do the best we can. So my plan is, once I start seeing sprouts when they're in my dark office closet there, I'm going to pull them out of there. I'm going to empty them in these clear tubs right here, put them underneath the barn there. They'll get some light under there, and we're just going to have to roll with whatever the outside temperature is. It's getting down to 50s at night, sometimes colder than that. But in the daytime, sometimes it gets up to 70. Not really anything I can do about that. So we're just going to do the best we can there. Put them underneath the barn so they don't get wet, they stay dry, they get some light, and at least they get cooler temperatures than they would get if they were in my office closet. So we talked about the details of that green sprouting process and why it's important to have your potatoes hit the ground running when you plant them so they don't rot just sitting there in the ground. Another reason we want them to hit the ground running is because, especially down here, we don't have that much time before it gets really, really hot. Now up there where Jim is in Maine in the far north, their spring planted potatoes just keep growing and growing until the frost kills them in the fall, because it doesn't get that hot up there. Down here, when it gets 85, 90 degrees, potatoes don't care for that at all. And that's also why this green sprouting process is going to be so important for us. Having these things start growing not long after we put them in the ground. That way we can maximize their growth before it gets too hot. And as Jim said, this green sprouting process, if done properly, can take 10 to 14 days off the field growth time of your potatoes. So if you live in the South, you want to make sure you get your potatoes planted early. If you wait too late, they won't have a chance to get very big before the heat's going to kill off those plants. If you live in the middle or the northern part of the country, probably got a little more leeway as far as when you need to plant your potatoes, because it's not going to get as hot up there as quick as it does down here. So we'll try to get ours in the ground between the middle of February towards the end of February. Kind of got a 2-week window there when we try to get them in the ground. You know, sometimes we have to work around what the weather is doing, if it's too wet or whatever, but that's our ideal window, middle of February to the end of February here in Zone 8B. So we'll probably take 2 of these raised beds and use them for planting potatoes. Not exactly sure which beds it will be. Maybe those 2 taller ones in the back corner there. But I think 2 of these rectangular beds should be enough for those little 1-pound quantities we want to try. And then for the in-ground potatoes, I think we're going to go right here to the left of these Brussels sprouts, where we had our broccoli and cauliflower. The chickens are kind of working over this, cleaning up this a little bit. But this spacing here, 3-foot row spacing, 3 rows, is going to work perfectly for those 3 varieties we have to plant in our in-ground garden. Now let's talk about some things to consider when deciding where you're going to plant your potatoes. So number one, you want to make sure you've got some well-drained soil. If you've got soil that just stays kind of wet and mucky, the potatoes are probably not going to do that great there. Now if you're planting in containers or a raised bed garden, you probably don't have to worry about drainage. Those usually drain pretty good. But if you're planting in the ground, pick a spot that drains better so you don't have potatoes rotting in the ground just sitting in oversaturated soil all the time. Now if the weather tends to keep your garden area kind of wet in late winter, early spring when you'd be wanting to plant potatoes, one thing you can do is use a tarp to keep the area from getting so wet. So if you're getting a lot of rain, obviously that's going to keep the soil wet, make it harder to plant potatoes or delay your potato planting. But if you put a tarp on there, it's going to keep it relatively dry. You can pull back that tarp and plant your potatoes whenever you want. Now the next consideration has to do with crop rotation. So you want to try not to plant potatoes in a spot where you've had nightshades in the last couple years. So that includes tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and potatoes, obviously. So try not to plant your potatoes where you've had any of those crops recently. That'll go a long way to kind of helping your pest and disease pressure as those potatoes mature. And our third consideration has a lot to do with why we picked this spot right here for our in-ground potatoes. Yes, this space right here is going to be perfect for 3 rows, but what was planted here before is going to help out our potatoes a lot. So on this channel I talk a lot about using mustard as a cover crop because it's a biofumigant for the soil, reduces a lot of soil-borne pests and diseases. We use mustard for that in a lot of places as a cover crop, but any kind of brassica is going to give you some level of biofumigation. So we had broccoli and cauliflower here. Those are in the brassica family. Yeah, we're not going to till them into the soil like we would do our mustard cover crop, but if you can pick a spot where you've had brassicas in the last few months, that will be a lot better than a spot that didn't have brassicas in the last few months. So think about that as you're choosing your potato spot. If you've got some broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, any kind of brassica that's done or almost done, that would be a great spot for potatoes. Now I told you down here in South Georgia in Zone 8B, we're going to try to plant between mid-February and late February, but what if you're in another zone or another climate? My general rule of thumb is to plant about 2 weeks before your average last frost date in late winter, early spring, whenever that happens. So if you Google your average last frost date for your area, count back 2 weeks. That's when you want to be putting your potatoes in the ground. So I hope you enjoyed the video today. I'm going to go get these seed potatoes in my office closet where it's dark and consistently 70 to 75 degrees. We'll keep a close eye on them over the next 2 weeks or so and wait until we start seeing some little sprouts. When we do, that's when we'll move them outside into the light and where it's a little cooler. When we do that, I'll be sure to show you guys. So now that you know which varieties that we're going to be growing, please share with me in the comments below which varieties you're going to be growing. And if you're an experienced potato grower, please share your location and when you find is the ideal time to plant for there. Really helps out a lot of the beginner growers that are watching our channel. They can see your location and say, okay, this gives me a better idea of when I need to plant. As always, you can find links to all our affiliate partners in the description below, including Wood Prairie. Got some coupon codes for some of those companies so you can take advantage of those discounts. Don't forget to go check out our website, lazydogfarm.com, where we have our fig trees. We've got our garden blog, recipes, hats, shirts, all kind of good stuff over there. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to subscribe, hit that notification button, like, and share, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.
Oh, farewell, by the beauty of your life.